Men hold the power to be respectfully disruptive, to transform discriminatory ideas and unfair practices, because we cannot wait centuries for gender equality. We as men must do our part to disrupt the status quo, to act for equality, to change minds and hearts, right now, everywhere. Together, we can end the disparities. We can stop the discrimination against the women in our lives and around the world. Respectfully disruptive. That's who we are. We are men committed to gender equality and a better world for all. We are leaders, activists, feminists, change makers in our lives and our business practices. In being respectfully disruptive, we are acting for gender equality and calling everyone around us to join together in making gender equality the new status quo. Today, we are HeForShe, acting for gender equality and the rights of women and girls to be free from discrimination for good. Join us.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, welcome to the 2023 HeForShe Summit. Our MC is renowned journalist and news anchor for MSNBC and NBC News. Please welcome Richard Louie.
It is so good to see all of you. Good morning. Morning. How is UNGA? Yeah. Good morning, UN women. Yeah. Now make a noise if you're a he for she. Yes. All right. I am so pleased to be here today, and I can promise you, and I don't like to promise too many things, that you will have an exciting event today. This program is jam-packed with a lineup of exceptional speakers for you. Be prepared to be inspired. HeForShe, as you know, is an extraordinary global initiative. I remember when it was launched 9 years ago as a HeForShe advocate, with a brand new tie today, by the way. I am so glad that we are continuing this movement. It is so important. For almost 10 years now, HeForShe has invited men and boys across the world to become allies of the women's movement with some remarkable successes. It is so great to see it wherever we go. And each year, HeForShe champion and members gather at the HeForShe Summit. So welcome, welcome, welcome. This offers a unique platform at the United Nations for people in business, government, and academia to gather. And this is why we're here, bringing together all these different groups to rally into action for gender equality. This year, you're going to hear much more about being respectfully disruptive. As you can tell in our opening message, in our opening video, that is this theme. We'll talk about what it means, why it works, how this all might add up, and hopefully that we can have faster progress, and how we can do things together in big ways and in small ways to fight gender inequality. Now, as we begin, and throughout the summit, I'm going to invite all of you to think about how you can be respectfully disruptive in your own lives. If there's one thing that you can do after this great summit, what will it be? What will you do? To start us off, I want to welcome UN Women Executive Director, Seema Bahous, to take the stage. Madam Executive Director.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to see you all And I'm so happy that I see this great hall filled with men who are he for she, and with women who are also she for she. It is great to see you all here today. I started by disrupting my outfit and wearing the he for she scarf. It might not fit 100% with the colors, but I love it. So, Excellencies, partners, dear friends, all protocols observed. 9 years ago, our HeForShe initiative called on men and boys to step forward and play their part in the pursuit of gender equality. We asked them to stand shoulder to shoulder with women and girls, to challenge harmful and destructive gender stereotypes, and to become active advocates for the gender equality. Since then, 600 million people around the world have heard our call. A community of more than 3 million online activists has generated more than 3 billion conversations on this topic on social media every year. The HeForShe champions, dedicated individuals from across governments, business, nonprofit, and academia, have shown what stepping forward looks like with their advocacy and initiatives. For example, our corporate champions have increased participation of women in their boards to a minimum of 40%, and this is commendable. Together, we are bringing gender equality closer to reality. Together, we are moving the needle. At the same time, we must be realistic that we are swimming against a tide of growing pushback against women's rights. It should particularly alarm us that the attitudes of young men seem to be going backward, unfortunately. A UN Women-supported survey showed that 58% of young men aged 16 to 19 believe that men are better political leaders than women. Well, we don't agree with that, but they do. How then will we achieve equality of women's leadership? Nearly 1 in 4 young men believe that there are acceptable instances to hit a partner or spouse. How then will we end the scourge of violence against women? Technology offers the potential to greatly improve women's rise. Yet, too often, particularly in the social media space, it does the exact opposite. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have much to do. Next year, we celebrate HeForShe's 10th anniversary. It is our ambition to take this initiative to the next level, and we look forward to sharing our ideas with you. We all must speak out and demand change. We must be ready, wherever and whoever we are, to respectfully disrupt any misogynist behavior that demeans anyone. We must challenge the portrayal of toxic masculinity and promote positive male role models who champion gender equality. Our allyship and partnerships, institutional and individual, have a vital role to play. It is our job to inspire the next generation of gender equality advocates, to break down barriers, and to create a more inclusive and equitable society for all. This new iteration of the HeForShe campaign must also place intersectionality at its heart. We know that gender inequality intersects with other forms of discrimination, such as race, ethnicity, class, and sexual orientation. When we acknowledge and address all intersecting barriers, we pave the way to more inclusive societies for all. Most of all, I want to repeat our call that we be ready to challenge an unacceptable status quo, that we be impatient for change, and that we be ready to be respectfully disruptive. Thank you all for all what you have done. all that you will do, and I wish us all a successful summit and beyond. And I thank you again and again and again. Thank you.
Madam Executive Director, thank you again for those encouraging words, and we will do exactly what you have asked us to do, to be respectfully disruptive, right? Yes. Do not cross the Madam Executive Director. We will get this done. I thank you so much for showing us how HeForShe truly is a turning point, an important point in advocacy for gender equality. As we all gather here today, a community of 3 million people of all gender identities standing up, a bold, united, visible force around the world for change. This is, as we all look amongst ourselves, truly remarkable, as we represent so many different communities here in just this room, whether you're sitting with us or you're watching us, no matter where you're at. Yet, you have also reminded us here how much is still at stake for women and girls, and I appreciate that. And that we need HeForShe and the movement to move forward and to go powerfully forward more than ever. And all of us must act respectfully here to disrupt misogyny. We have a wonderful chance to learn much more about this today through our extraordinary lineup of speakers and panelists. That is me saying, be ready, it's going to be good. Thank you again, Executive Director Bahous, for your leadership, for bringing all of us together, and for this truly exciting event. Now, in a couple of minutes, we're going to begin a series of panel discussions, as I was intimating. The discussions will unpack the meaning of being respectfully disruptive. We're going to kind of deconstruct that for you, get your ideas, please do engage, of how, by doing that, we can move societies forward and not backwards. But first, I'd like to get us inspired by concrete results and achievements of HeForShe champions. These results are truly worth celebrating. I want you to, if you can, watch this special video presenting HeForShe champions' results and achievements.
To me, being respectfully disruptive means speaking up when you see behaviors that hold back the progress that we're all trying to make. It's doing so respectfully, but challenging. You've got to make it a little bit uncomfortable in terms of the conversation that you see. It's also about speaking up to drive change and jumping into a conversation that candidly is going to be hard to say and for others hard to hear. But the outcome we're looking for is to disrupt the change that we're ultimately making and hopefully speeding up as we look ahead. We want all of our people, men and women, to feel like they belong, be supported, have equal opportunities, they feel valued and valuable. That's why gender equality is a key part of the inclusion first strategy for us. And it focuses on 3 areas. Action, where you drive change. Accountability, where we hold our leaders, all of us, not just those designated leaders with titles, and all of our organization responsible for that change and making such change in a responsible way. And then also bringing advocacy to the table. We've got to actually create an environment to have the discussions. We've got to bring a voice to the change. And as part of that strategy, we're trying to equip our people with the inclusive leadership skills to help them value diversity and think and act differently with inclusivity and equality in mind. It's not one at the expense of the other. It's 1 + 1 = 3, and that's the big opportunity for all of us to play a big role.
And so we start with our first panel. And the first panel is titled Being Respectfully Disruptive in the Pursuit of Gender Equality. I'd like to introduce our panelists. If they could still come to the stage for us, that'd be fantastic. Michael Roberts, CEO, HSBC USA. Maha Al-Katan, Chief People and Sustainability Officer, DP World in the UAE. Nompilo Marafo, Group Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer, MTN. And Diego Alfonso Juarez Ruiz, Tec de Monterrey University student. Welcome to all four of you. Let me start with you, if I may, Michael, on this. And this is a very important statistic to watch. When we look at the mean gender pay gap, which you're very aware of, the progress from 2017 to 2020, it has improved by 3 percentage points, 28 to 31. There's also, of course, and you know this as a HeForShe champion, as well as the CEO of HSBC, you have committed to achieving a goal of 35% female representation in senior leadership roles by 2025. What do you perceive as the objectives, the obstacles to getting to those points, to the achievement of the goal of gender equality in the finance industry? You can see by the very numbers, this is an uphill battle.
Right. And thank you, Richard. And first of all, wonderful to be here. This is a great event, and this initiative is so critical to all of us in this room, I know, but for everyone else around the world. And we're just very thrilled to be a part of it, in particular with such an international and very global group of people we have up on the stage with me. So as you mentioned, this is something that in this industry, clearly we need to make more progress. For most of you, you think of bankers, and historically it's been white guys with top hats and cigars. And effectively, that's what it was for most of its industrial history. So when I joined the bank, or banking 35 years ago, it was primarily white male. And it is still today, but we are making progress. That is the good news. Richard mentioned some of it, but we obviously have a lot more to do. Now, I think if you look at it, it really comes down to just a multi-variable sort of solution that you have to go through on a very consistent, constant basis. We have to go out and make sure that young women want to go into our industry. And for a long time, we never reached out. So we have to reach out. We have to tell them what the industry is. We have to say it is a welcoming place, please come. And that has to start very early. So now today, we go out and bring in high school students at a pretty young age to tell them this is what they should be thinking about. We want to make sure they're prepared when they come in. So what type of courses do you need to take both in high school and college so that you are more prepared, so that they come in with an ability to progress as much as possible. Once they arrive, we need to make sure that we provide them both with training on how to be a banker, but also training on how to succeed in a large corporation. There's a lot of things that people are not told, and I think in particular for women, we need to be just very, very upfront. These are the things that you're going to have to look out for. Let's be honest. These are some challenges that you're going to have to face because they're not actually told that. Critically, they have to have mentors, and those mentors should be both men and women, just not one. And that's something that we constantly promote and need to get better at. And that leads to the most important element of this, and Richard, you mentioned it earlier because of the pay gap issue, representation. Representation defines pay gap. It's a mathematical number, so the more women you have in the higher positions, the less the pay gap. And so that's really what is critical for us to do. Representation is really underpinned by a couple of things. One, recruiting women at all levels. And so today we really focus on it to make sure that everything we do, all the recruiting we do, is done in a way that is as equal as it possibly can be. Equal slates, making sure that there are women on slates for every job. Because it's very easy when you ask someone to go out and hire someone from outside in the professional world, they will hire whoever is someone that looks like them and that they're very comfortable with. You also at the same time make sure that we have a process of promotion that is very transparent. And so we use data. We use data to look at what we're doing to make sure that that process is as fair and as equitable as possible. And then lastly, very, very important, is attrition. Attrition is probably the biggest issue that we face today, in particular for women who are having children, have children, or are caregivers. And we've got to solve this. And that is something we're doing, hopefully, with now hybrid working. We are committed to have hybrid working. I think it's a game changer, frankly. We have policies that we've introduced around maternity and paternity, which I think are very good, very helpful. The thing, however, that I'm most challenged with, and I talk to my fellow CEOs, however, it's really the environment. Because we can have lots of good policies, but if we don't have the environment that really supports those policies, they won't work. And those policies coming down to making men support what the women need in the workplace to actually stay in the workplace. And that is the greatest challenge that I have. That really comes down to both training those men, making sure that they, and this is the word that we use a lot around, are allies, and they can understand if they are not supportive, and that may not even be overtly not supportive. It's often being, you know, I'm sorry you're leaving so early to pick up your kids. Why are you doing that? It's those slight things that I just talked to a group of senior women very recently. That's what the biggest issue is today, to be able to get into that level of detail. And so we're trying very hard to make sure we do that. And it's really making sure that it's allyship, that the men understand what that means. Because I imagine when they're called by their wives to say, you have to go pick up your kids, they'll do it. But when a woman says they have to do that, they don't understand why. And that's just unacceptable to me. So it's all those things. And I'd say, lastly, Richard, all this comes down to not only is this good and just, and we should do this because this is what we should do, it's also good for business. So there is a business imperative that we get this right. Because our customers want it, it makes sense, it's how we actually do better, and we have lots of case examples of that. And so we're going to try hard. It's a long journey, a journey that we're on, but we're committed. I'm committed personally. I have daughters, and so this is very, very important for me personally. And so we will continue on the march, hopefully quicker and with more impact.
Michael, thank you for that. And the very notes that you're bringing up about operationalizing in finance what can seem to be quite a heady objective. So thank you for your leadership in that. Maha, moving to you in your leadership at DP World, a global corporation that focuses on logistics. And I don't need to tell you this, it is very much a male-dominated industry. And just some statistics about your efforts and what you've done at DP World. DP World's 2022 Women on Board initiative prepared women for director roles, leading to 12 appointments in 33 seats. And that's a 38% increase. Some of the things that you have been doing at DP World. As a champion yourself for gender equality, and DP World supporting you in doing that, can you tell us what are the envisioned advantages of a more gender equal business and a more gender equal DP World?
So, first of all, thank you, UN Women, for the invitation. I don't want to talk about the advantages of more gender equal workplace. I think we're beyond this conversation. Everyone in this room today knows why should we have a gender equal representation, why it's good to have gender equality in a workforce. The question should be more around how can we achieve that? How can we make the workforce inclusive? How can we bring in more women in the workforce? And I think we are living in the right era for this. We're living in a time where technology and automation are disrupting every aspect of our life, including the compositions of work. You just mentioned DP World has been traditionally in a very male-dominated sector. We're a very male-dominated industry. More than 80% of our jobs are in operations, and they're physically demanding jobs, which usually discourage women from entering these roles. With the digital disruption and the automation, the industry is moving from a manpower industry to a brain power industry. The jobs are becoming more and more gender neutral. I'll share an example. In the past, a crane driver's job, a crane operator's role in DP World, in a port, used to be operating a crane sitting 60 meters above ground and moving hundreds of tons of containers from a ship to a yard. Women were discouraged from applying from this role for the right reasons. When we built our Terminal 3 in Jabal Ali, we used automation in our advantage. We automated this job. Today, the crane driver's job is being done from an automated air-conditioned room behind the computer screen. We have today more than 90% of the crane drivers in Jabal Ali Terminal 3 females, 22 of them, who traditionally would not have applied for this role, which was a very heavy-duty, physically demanding job.
Oh, exciting examples of what you're doing to be gender neutral. Nampilo, let's talk here. You're also a HeForShe champion for gender equality at MTN, and MTN's made a number of commitments. One of them that you can talk about very well is how to get women and girls to participate in the digital economy, how that they can be empowered. As we see in so many places around the world, I've seen it in my reporting, where there is a clear distinction when it comes to a daughter or a son and a decision being made about who gets to use this. How do we get to be disruptive respectfully?
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. For MTN Group, so the topic talks about respectfully being disruptive. So this made it very difficult for me to come and talk about stats in terms of what we've done, because there's an easy part. So the most difficult part for a HeForShe champion today of what we need to talk about is that how can we be truly disruptive, right? So for MTN, we started this journey quite a few years ago. We have met our target almost. We said we want to have achieved gender equality by 2030. We're almost there, ahead of 2030. We spoke about gender equality. We spoke about pay gap as well, which we have easily fixed, because if you look at it, for me, if you look at issues of gender equality, it moves away from being an issue to being an issue of will. If the organization has got a will to do it, it becomes a bit easier to get there. So for MTN, it's more about our value system than something just we count as part of our strategy, which has been important. I'll just call out that bit for a moment. So every month at MTN, we literally sit and have a conversation around how many women have we brought into the organization. The reason we do that is, if you look at the stats, she mentioned it, which was quite important, that we need to move away from talking about these are the numbers. We need to talk about how do we fix it. Because sometimes we go and devise strategies as companies and we shelve them and no one actually gets to implementation stage. So it's been very important for us that we actually know what's happening. So at MTN, for instance, if we agree that we're going to have a certain number of women in certain positions, it could take 12 months to fill in a position. We insist that you will find a female, right? That's important. So, but we've had to reflect a bit deeper in terms of how come with all those initiatives, especially in the continent of Africa, we're still not seeing people that look like myself joining ICT organizations. So we have a lot of programs in ICT ecosystem, skilling, et cetera, And just to give a bit of a case study, I recently attended a graduation in one of our markets where we had deployed a digital skills academy. Out of 200 people and pupils that graduated, less than 30% were female. This tells us the significant problem that happens in our communities, which will make the notion of leaving no one behind very difficult. unless we really try to put some effort in terms of understanding why girls are not even taking the opportunity to participate. So for me, that's where it's critical. If we're going to be disruptive, we need to understand the challenges that women have still in 2023, still today, for them not to be able to participate even when we think that the opportunity is there for them to participate. So that's important. And I'm saying it's important why? You look at the continent of Africa, which is predominantly where MTN operates. If we're going to have women in our workplace, we need to make sure that the ecosystem from where we recruit from is ready for us to get the women inside.
Thank you, Nampilo. And I think you and Diego have been talking, because now we're going to go to Diego, who at his university, he managed to direct the survey project called Te Escuchamos, Violencia de Género en el Campus, which means we are listening, gender-based violence on campus. And you had a direct impact on 6,400 students. Is he being disruptive? Yeah. And it's the beginning of developing those allies that you're talking about, Nampilo, right at that level in education. Diego, to you on this, and yes, this happens often. You get to speak for a generation. How do we, from your perspective and your experience on campus, need to be respectfully disruptive?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here representing Mexico and also the different objectives done by Tecnológico de Monterrey in alliance with UN Women. So firstly, I must say that I admire completely the work my generation has done towards pushing back on this pushback, right? And I do believe that we bring a trend of speaking up against gender inequality. However, we should not consider the whole work of generation inequality as a whole, but instead as a progress from within. Data from our institution shows that while 97% of our students understand different gender identities, not even half of them believe in the usage of inclusive language or other means in order to make those gender identities feel included. So we see that generation equality is still something that keeps on building. Right. While mentioning that, my generation is extremely successful in pointing out that older generations should listen to our generation without any assumptions of what the youth needs. Once we feel, as a generation, that we are listened to, we shift from a negative disruption towards a more respectful disruption that is seen as an equal in a conversation where we are able to collaborate horizontally, right? On the same topic that generations are in polar opposites, I should congratulate the work that older generations have been doing fighting against gender inequality. However, our failing so far has come from conformism, right? We should never stay on the mindset that what we do right now is enough. There's always a way to improve our line of action, and simply the words just enough do not fit the gender equality agenda. Also the topic of projects that are respectfully disruptive, I would like to mention the same survey you mentioned, Te Escuchamos, which was presented by the Student Participation Committee with a special direction from Ana Paula Mellon and Carla Hernandez. And in said project, we were able to understand that the authorities at our institution were looking at our proposals for gender equality as disruptive for them being too loud. So instead, we shifted towards data analysis, towards different mathematical ways to present our information, and we were able to represent over 22,000 students actually active on campus and personally tell the testimonies of 6,000 of them. This way, we understood that being respectfully disruptive is finding the language where you meet halfway between generations. And I encourage younger generations to find this language that the people in power understand, that they accept. Maybe it's data analysis, maybe it's something else, but use it in order to create projects that are accepted by them. And also use it to create strategic alliances, just like the HeForShe Alliance.
Thank you so much, Diego. You got a lot of work in front of you, and based on what you've done so far, we're looking forward to that. Everybody on this panel. Michael, we're going to have to close in 2 minutes, but I did want to get your advice. If you were to be speaking to a group of CEOs, which there are some here, what would be the tip, the practical suggestion that you could give from one to another, how to be respectfully disruptive in the boardroom?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you have to set the tone. And I think you have to really be fully committed to it. And you have to be willing to really push that and be respectively disruptive. And sometimes that's very unfamiliar and sometimes very uncomfortable. But that's what you have to do to make progress. You have to create that tension. And it's for a not only good cause, it will be better for you in the long run as a company. So do it with confidence, do it with sense of purpose, but also do it with the consistency and that level of commitment, both as an individual and as a company. And I think if you do all that, you will get the results, you will get the rewards that comes along with it.
Thank you so much. Maha, your suggestion from, as a leader at your organization to others, how can we operationalize this? What's the tip?
So there is no one-size-fits-all. My challenges are different than their challenges. But I think what we all need to do is we need to make sure that we remove all the unconscious biases. We need to level the playing field. We really need to create an inclusive environment and look at talent as a talent, regardless of their gender. I think that's where we start. And then after that, every company needs to do a data-based analysis of their gaps and their opportunities. As you mentioned, when we did our data-based analysis, we found out that there is a gap in the number of women on our operational boards. And based on that, we put a solution for it. So definitely no one size fits all, but we can all create an inclusive environment for everyone. Thank you.
That reminds me of something. We cannot be bystanders anymore. And Nampilo, you were saying that. We need to stand up. And there's something that I learned from in the last 2 years called bystander intervention, and it has 5 Ds in it. And it's ways that we can do something every day, whether it's at the corporate level or it's something that we see when we walk outside of 1356 Broadway, if I got the address correctly. That is important, right? And that's what we need to do in business, and the two of you as leaders need to do it. Nampilo, what would be your suggestion in 30 seconds if you can?
Yeah, so for me, personally, my suggestion will be that we need to be brave. We need to have a will to call it out. There's so much that comes with incorporates of like, you're afraid to speak up, you're afraid to say it when it's happening. Mm-hmm. And it's a teachable moment. Because if you're a woman, you know when things are getting out of hand. And even if you're a man, you know when you're being inappropriate. Calling it out and being disruptive is very important.
Teachable, so key, that we can share with others. It has to be a teachable moment. Diego, you've showed us how you're respectfully disruptive. What would you say to others who might want to do this in 30 seconds? I want to be like Diego.
Thank you. To everyone, I would like to say just to listen to those who dare disrupt. And to the people that hold positions of power, we need to understand that in 10, 20, or 50 years from now, people will not remember our organizations for being innovative, but rather they will remember them for how we addressed or didn't address gender violence.
Thank you to all 4 of our panelists to kick us off. Learning how to be respectfully disruptive. I very much appreciate all of your perspectives. As we now leave the stage, I'd like to show a second video. Please, if you could give your attention to the screens.
We're absolutely clear that to be a successful humanitarian organization, we also need to be a feminist organization. That means taking seriously the structural inequalities that women and girls face in the conflict settings around the world in which we work. We need to disrupt the way in which services have been traditionally provided, and frankly, disrupt the way in which our own sector has traditionally worked, so that we can get a better deal for women and girls in the services that we provide, but also in the way that the humanitarian sector works. We know that when our programs disaggregate between men and women, when they target our services appropriately between men and women, when they dedicate themselves to addressing the inequalities that women and girls face, the results can be genuinely transformative. That's what we strive to do every day in our services around the world. It's a disruption that we're proud to be part of.
All right, we're now going to move to our second panel. This one looks to be a very interesting topic. We're going to look at the critical issue affecting all of us. And this is, again, being respectfully disruptive, but in AI today. And we will have how that will have a lasting impact for coming years and generations. To tell us more, I want to welcome to our stage our moderator for this second conversation, Dr. Sasha Lucchini. Good to see you. Research scientist and climate lead, Hugging Face, and excitingly, a very recently named one of MIT Technology Review's 2023 35 innovators under 35 in artificial intelligence. And as well, next to you, your distinguished panelists, we have Leonardo Nicoletti, data visualization reporter from Bloomberg News. Maya Nicole Dumet, Harvard University student. Joachim Reitzer, Chief External and Corporate Affairs Officer, Vodafone. Dr. Joy Buolamwini, founder of the Algorithmic Justice League and author of Unmasking AI. Also has the best title so far, I think. To all of you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for having us. You're probably tired of hearing about AI at this point. I know that it seems to be everywhere, but as much as you hear about it, there's a lot more that you don't hear about and don't see, because AI is really integrated in so many different systems in our lives. It really decides the advertisements we see. It sometimes decides if we get an interview for a job. It decides so many things, our mortgage rates, without us realizing it. And that's why it's important to understand that artificial intelligence isn't magic. It's really just a bunch of fancy math. And what powers AI is really data. And who produces data? Us, as societies, as communities. And so any kind of biases, any kind of patterns that exist in this data get picked up on by and amplified, often amplified by AI. And on one hand, it's interesting because artificial intelligence is really powered by human intelligence, but the bias in AI is also powered by the bias in us as people. And this is a really important, I guess, connection to make, because AI bias doesn't come from thin air. It really comes from the patterns that we perpetuate in our societies. And so there are different dimensions of bias. We're going to talk about gender bias mostly here, but it could be everything from gender to race to even politics and gender. All of these are different biases that exist and that are perpetuated. And as an AI researcher, part of my job is to create tools and ways for people to understand and engage with AI technologies, because it may seem like this ivory tower that we sit in and we code up these algorithms and then throw them out into society, but actually it's really important for society at large to understand AI, to engage with these technologies, and to push back respectfully when they don't correspond to our needs, right? If, you know, all I see in terms of advertising is, I don't know, shoes, and just because I'm a woman, just because I'm of a certain age, I can push back at that. I can ask questions about like what data is being used, how is this being used, et cetera, et cetera. There's often also, we talk about generative AI lately, like things like ChatGPT and Midjourney, all these things you might have heard about in the news, but there's also different kinds of AI that exist that may be a bit less newsworthy at the moment, but things like, you know, when fraud gets detected on your credit card, or for example, when your CV gets gets filtered out for a job. And these kinds of algorithms are also very important because maybe they don't give us cool images like DALL-E 2, but they do make very important decisions in our lives. And so on today's panel, we'll hear about different perspectives about bias in AI and how to address that bias. So we'll start with Leonardo from the perspective of journalism and the media. Then we'll hear from Maya from the point of view of students and new generations, right? Because as Diego mentioned, there is a certain baton to be passed, and it's really important for the young students of today to learn the skills they need to survive in a world that's heavily influenced by AI. Then we'll hear from Joachim from an industry perspective, because of course there are multiple structures that exist that are influenced as well in the day-to-day by AI and new technologies. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Joy and her tireless superhero work in fighting algorithmic discrimination and her new book. So I'm really looking forward to moderating this discussion, and at the end, I will try to sum it up in a little 30-second soundbite so that you have some maybe parting thoughts to go home with. Leonardo? So my first question is, your article on gender and racial bias in generative AI, which was amazing, really brought this issue forward, right? It made it something that people really understood and could see. What are the key findings, if you had to sum them up, that we should all be aware of?
Thank you, Sasha. It's really an honor to be here today to discuss this important topic, but also really to be here with people that have contributed so much to our understanding of bias in artificial intelligence. And so for the majority of this year, my team at Bloomberg News has looked at generative artificial intelligence, this new type of AI that really has become so popular recently because it makes it really easy to create content for things like advertising. And as a leading news organization, as data journalists, we wanted to understand, how do we audit this technology? How do we evaluate it for potential risks or harms? And how do we communicate these risks to our global audience? And finally, how do we keep AI developers accountable for these risks? And we really took a similar approach to that of researchers like yourself or Dr. Joy here. We essentially designed an experiment to quantify the magnitude of gender and racial biases in generative artificial intelligence. We asked Stable Diffusion, a popular model for AI-generated images, to create thousands of images of workers in different professions. We then took all those images and we quantified gender and racial bias by using methods developed by Dr. Joy Buolamwini and Dr. Timnit Gebru in their groundbreaking work on bias in commercial facial recognition systems, gender shades. And the results of our analysis really allowed us to highlight a persistent and systematic pattern of gender and racial bias in which women and people with darker skin are systematically underrepresented in high-paying professions and overrepresented in low-paying professions or jobs. So let me just show a few examples to illustrate this pattern to the audience. When asked for, when given the keyword CEO, for example, this is what a sample of images looks like that is created by a popular generative artificial intelligence model. When given the keyword housekeeper, this is what you see. And this is what you see when given the keyword judge. And what we did is we also looked at real demographic data and thousands of images like these ones. And what we were able to show is that generative artificial intelligence doesn't just replicate stereotypes or disparities that you see in the real world. It actually exacerbates these and makes them appear much worse than what they really are. Consider the example of judges that you see here on the screen. By looking at thousands of these images, we found that women made up only 3% of all of the images generated for this keyword. But in reality, in the United States alone, more than 30% of judges are women. Across OECD countries, more than 50% of judges are women on average. And so things got even worse when we looked at the intersection of gender and racial biases in generative artificial intelligence. Because this technology tends to both amplify gender bias and racial bias at the same time, we find that generative AI tends to produce its most skewed representations of reality when it comes to women with darker skin. So let me show you another example. Well, there were almost no women with dark skin tones generated for high-paying jobs. When we gave the artificial intelligence model keywords like fast food worker or social worker, the model created women with dark skin more than half of the time, or almost half of the time. And so this tendency, these biases really become apparent if you take all of the images generated for one job and you combine them together into a typical face for that job, which is what you see here in this visual. And it really brings the point home, makes it apparent that artificial intelligence thinks that some jobs or positions in society are reserved to some people and not others. Now, many AI bias experts, including Dr. Joy Buolamwini and yourself, Sasha, have warned, and also who have been doing this research for much longer than I have been warning that the persistent gender and racial inequalities, biases, in artificial intelligence could lead to real societal harms. Our interviews and our reporting has emphasized this, that biased generative AI could exacerbate gender and racial inequalities by, for example, creating significant barriers for people whose identities are marginalized in the workplace or in education. That negative stereotypes can lead to all sorts of mental health issues for younger generations that are exposed to those stereotypes. The list goes on. And so it seems like we've reached a tipping point where, yes, artificial intelligence and more recently AI, generative AI, has become really accessible and really easy to use and really cheap to use. So it is an exciting time to be working with AI. But at the same time, the potential harms of AI bias have not been fully addressed by public and private institutions. And so as we go forward, as this technology becomes more mainstream, we need to come up with fair ways to use this technology and make it so that it doesn't hurt certain communities to benefit others.
Thank you, Leonardo. Maya. Bravo. Sorry, I'm the timekeeper here. Maya, you're currently a student at Harvard. What are the opportunities and challenges do you personally see as a young person, as a student, and as someone who will soon enter the workforce when it comes to AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me, first and foremost. But the world is quickly learning and coming to terms with how AI is changing our world as we know it, and students are in a very similar place. In the classroom, there's optimism about AI in terms of its potential for problem solving and innovation, but there's also a hesitation about academic integrity with generative AI, as you mentioned, as well as even job security as AI becomes more advanced. Really hoping I have a job. But truly, there's no one perspective among students or opinion. There's generally a lot of uncertainty about entering this workforce that is definitely surrounded by and soon to be intertwined with AI. But as highlighted by Leonardo, there is a lot of problems in AI. And it is imperfect, riddled with algorithmic biases, and I think students are very aware of that. These biases definitely transcend the technology, definitely in the workplace. In 2018, Amazon actually had to halt their use of AI-based software that was found to be favoring the resumes of men over women in their hiring processes, but it is so pervasive, this algorithmic bias, that its impact extends beyond the workplace into real life. For example, artist Stephanie Dinkins has done some incredible work highlighting that AI has great difficulty depicting the feelings of Black women. When AI is prompted to produce images of Black women smiling or crying, they often render non-human depictions. Or look at the inclusion of AI software in housing application processes, where AI can jeopardize the housing of people of color, overcharging for loans, or outright denying housing on the basis of race and stereotypes associated. Or take a look at the criminal justice system, where individuals have been arrested and mistaken for perpetrators on the basis of false facial recognition technology matches. First, Robert Williams of Michigan in 2020, and most recently in August, Portia Woodruff of Michigan, making her the first woman known to be wrongfully accused of a crime as a result of facial recognition technology. And as you mentioned, the list goes on. There are many ways in which algorithmic biases, gender bias and its intersection with race, socioeconomic status, among others, are prevalent and are making really negative impacts not only in the workplace, but well beyond that, and that must be addressed by being respectfully disruptive, especially as the use of AI increases moving forward.
Thank you, Maya. Joachim, you're next. As a HeForShe champion and part of that video we just saw, Vodafone made a commitment to build on its work to prevent domestic abuse through its workplace policy, apps against abuse, and research. Can you give us a little bit more information about AI and other technologies being used and managed by telecommunications companies?
Sure, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I'll move from the sort of a high level to make it very granular, because in the end, as a company, we deploy AI in many aspects of our production of services, how we run network, how we hire people. And this has been a journey of humility. So I will share with you our internal journey. It's been a difficult one as a means of actually starting a dialogue of what companies need to do and what we're convinced that all companies will need to do. So in 2014, we launched something called Just for You, and a tribute to our MTN colleague. They're fantastic competitors, but they share many of the values. And the core problem we wanted to tackle was all the digital gaps that existed by a targeted proposition towards vulnerable groups, low-income households, and particularly to also cover the gender digital gap that is so prevalent in Africa. Now, in the process of doing that, we of course leverage technologies like machine learning. And of course, even if the whole objective of this was to bridge a number of gaps into society, as we deployed machine learning into it, we basically had to take a deep breath and ask ourselves, is it actually playing out in the way that we wanted? So we got into a very detailed discussion, and there are 3 learnings that we came through. One is you can't deploy machine learning without having a really clear ethical compass. And so we have formulated as an AI ethics principles, an AI ethic framework that we developed. Now we roll it out in all products and services, all applications of AI, but it came out of that one journey that we built in Africa, and now we employ it globally for everything we do on AI. Point number 1. Point number 2 is companies are not in isolation. When you launch products and services, you have a responsibility to understand how those products and services interact with society, including societal norms and discrimination and biases in society. So being very mindful of your products and services and whether they're actually becoming a force for good and societal progress is your responsibility as a corporate. Point number 3 is, frankly, we need guardrails. You cannot allow companies or individuals or tech companies or startups to have a free-for-all and experiment on something that has impact on society. So we talk about that as governments, frankly, engaging with private sector, engaging with civil society, and setting guardrails. And the 2 guardrails that we're asking for. Number 1 is disruption per definition is painful. So while we want disruption, we want to leverage technology for disruption, we need to understand which are the people that will be more hurt by disruption than others. So concretely, as Vodafone, we're very worried that some of the displacement of jobs that will happen with generative AI in particular will be people of color and women. And there's a responsibility for all stakeholders to come together and figure out how do you actually navigate that disruption, even if AI would have a beneficial effect on the economy generically, that's not a good enough response. The second thing is, of course, we need to accept that technology can be a force for bad. And that's something that is often not discussed, but now hopefully everyone has experienced that launching social media platform, like launching a car without an airbag and a seatbelt, is probably not a good idea. So there is an awakening in the public community to discuss this, which we very much welcome, but we have to recognize certain technologies will amplify bias, they will actually empower criminals, and they will lead to more challenges in society. So there need to be very clear guardrails, and these are the three principles that guide approaches like Vodafone and many companies like us in how we approach AI.
Thank you. Joy, you've been working on your new book called Unmasking AI. I'm very much looking forward to reading it. Can you share some findings and potential solutions, if any, that can be shared in the pursuit of algorithmic justice, especially in the area of gender equality?
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for having me. I am so excited. My first book, Unmasking AI, my mission to protect what is human. In a world of machines, will be dropping in New York. So October 31st, Halloween, if you're around, there'll be a big masquerade at the launch at the Strand. So you're all invited. Please come. To your question about some of the findings and also some of the solutions, one of the things I've been thinking about is this notion of a car recall problem. So as AI systems are being adopted and also improving, there is oftentimes the temptation to look at what has recently been announced or released without thinking about legacy systems. And Maya, you brought up earlier Portia Woodruff. She was 8 months pregnant when she was arrested for a crime she did not commit, a carjack. Who do you know carjacking car, 8 months pregnant, first of all, right? But you had this, not just biases we've talked about, right, but also this machine bias, where if a machine has put a label on you, you saw some of these labels earlier, people are more likely to believe that. I remember when I was selected for 35 Under 35 for some of the gender shades work that was mentioned, I had respectfully called out a few tech companies, including Microsoft. And Microsoft had worked on improving gender representation in some of their models. So the day I think that announcement came out, Microsoft also made an announcement that they had improved their models. So I literally took the photo from the MIT Review website and I uploaded it to Microsoft's website because they said there was a new model. And it labeled that image, I think I was 55, I'm not 55, it was much older than I am. And it also labeled me male. And I bring that up not to beat up on Microsoft, but again, understanding legacy systems so that when we're adopting different solutions or we're talking about what's coming next, we are actively checking the systems that are still in use. So going back to Portia Woodruff, she was arrested in Detroit, the same city that Robert Williams was falsely arrested in 2020, the same city that Michael Oliver was falsely arrested in. And so we have this ongoing problem years later. So as leaders, as you're looking at ways of adopting various AI systems, make sure you know which version is being used and make sure you have a phase out phase and a continuous monitoring. I see we are almost out of time, or always out of time.
All of time.
So I will say the one other thing that I was so happy to write about in the book is that change is possible. And one of those examples were a group of tenants here in New York, the Brooklyn tenants, who actually successfully resisted the installation of an unwanted AI system as entry into their homes. So I wrote a poem for them. So when I'm not doing my stuff at MIT and leading the Algorithmic Justice League, I am also a poet. So I'd like to end with a little bit of a poem. It's called To the Brooklyn Tenants. To the Brooklyn tenants and the ex-coded and the allies, persisting and revealing the lies that we must accept, the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces. We celebrate your courage, no silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a neighborhood, global gatherings and summits, Sharpies and posters, panels and dialogues, dancing and music, everyone playing a role to orchestrate change. To the ex-coded and freedom fighters around the world, persisting and prevailing against algorithms of oppression, automating inequality through weapons of math destruction. We stand with you in gratitude. You demonstrate that people have a voice and a choice. When defiant melodies harmonize to elevate human life, dignity, and rights, the future and the victory is ours.
Bravo. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so much to our artificial intelligence panel. Another round of applause for them, please. And there was a little bit of a pause there because I was talking to Dr. Sasha on her way down, and I asked her what happened when she put in the words he for she into the engine that they were talking about. And we actually, this is what came up. All of you. So, all right. Thank you again, Dr. Sasha. I do appreciate it. We now have, and that was a great kickoff for our next part of the program, and that is Rupi Kaur. I don't need to introduce her, I guess, but I will. Rupi is just an amazing storyteller and message giver. She's a world-renowned author, performer, artist, amazing person, activist, known for her riveting poetry on love, loss, trauma, sexual violence, healing, femininity, migration. She is heralded as Writer of the Decade. Now, Kaur's collections have sold over 11 million copies. Many of you are probably owners. And it's been translated into 43 languages. She's going to do all 43 today, by the way. Surpassing Homer's Odyssey as the best-selling poetry of all time. Woo! Now, she joins us today for an exclusive performance, something that is very special for all of us gathering today, of her original poem. It's called To Believe in Equality. She has done this just for us. We will hear it just for us for the very first time. Today, Rupi Kaur will perform her original unpublished poem that I was just talking about, written for this special occasion on this HeForShe Summit. Rupi, great to see you. Come on up.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, UN Women, and everybody at HeForShe for having me. I love the men in my life, my father, my brothers, my friends, who clap for women when we take stages and march with us at protests. But when the speeches are over and the marches come to a close, even those who nod their heads at equal rights aren't willing to share the burden on our shoulders. What does it mean to believe in equality if it's just an idea you agree with, not one you lead with? All my life, I've watched the men I love carry around the dead weight of toxic masculinity and confuse it for an identity. All my life, I've seen the light go out in the eyes of those who use the world as target practice for their rage. And what we're left with is an epidemic of lonely men desperately looking for an exit. Too many men are ashamed to ask for help. Too many men still think rape is a lie women tell. Too many men are obsessed with taking away our bodily autonomy and our access to education in countless different parts of the world. Turns out, the same patriarchal hand that's been rewarding men for millennia also stole the greatest aspects of humanity away from them. Imagine how much women could accomplish if we didn't have to spend all our energy trying to climb out from beneath the patriarchy. Imagine thriving in a system that is rooting for us to win. If we had the opportunity to start over and recreate the system today, we would know better than to choose what we have now. So why do we keep spending more time preserving what we already know isn't working? I hope for a future where women are free, where women are safe, where women are respected. I hope for a future where there's a new blueprint for who men can be. I love the men in my life, my father, my brothers, all my friends who clap for women when we take stages and march with us at protests. I hope they find strength in empathy, power in compassion, and liberation in listening to those who have less and sharing their access, because an equal world is better for men too. Thank you everybody.
Rupi, thank you so much for that, as always, bringing down the house here at Gotham Hall to believe in equality. Thank you so much for that debut, Rupi, as always. Our next panel will be led by our moderator, Rachel Lowenstein. She has been selected as one of Ad Age's 2023 40 Under 40 honorees for her groundbreaking work in fostering neurodiversity. She has also accomplished this through her mindshare work. She is sharing the stage with our distinguished panelists. But first, please come on up, Rachel. We have Christine Emba from the Washington Post, Richard Reeves, American Institute for Boys and Men, Michelle Terry, CEO of Movember, and Joshua Hughes, Howard University student.
Hello, everybody. I knew it was going to be a tough act to follow Rupi, but I don't think I was emotionally prepared to get on stage right after that beautiful performance. So thank you so much, Rupi. It was stunning. So this conversation about masculinity and culture is something that we've been driving through the Unstereotype Alliance with some of the work that I've been doing with them. The Unstereotype Alliance, if you aren't aware, is a collective of over 240 organizations convened by UN Women that seeks to eradicate harmful stereotypes in advertising and media to drive social change. Now, this conversation about masculinity, I personally think, is one of the most urgent conversations that we need to have in culture right now because it implicates a lot of the challenges that we are facing. So to do that, I'm first going to do a little bit of a setup where I'm going to talk about the Spice Girls, which I'm sure you were not expecting, but stick with me because I do have a point. If you can't tell, that's me as a kid, and that's my big brother, Ben. Ben and I were best friends growing up. I have like this very core memory of us in 1997 where he decided to buy us the first Spice Girls CD, which frankly changed me forever. And when Ben bought us that CD, it happened to coincide at a time where the internet was confined to us hogging our parents' phone lines with AOL chat rooms. And as time went on and life changed, the Spice Girls broke up and the internet changed too. It changed a lot, particularly for Ben and his peers, and we would see that today in 2023, that across many cultural lines, men are not doing okay in society today. We're seeing sharp declines in enrollment amongst men. There's no shortage of cultural pundits talking about the loneliness epidemic that young men are facing. The gun violence that continues to happen in this country in particular that unfortunately is almost universally enacted by cisgender men, and directly at odds with HeForShe's mission, for the first time in modern history, gender equity is now, the concept of gender equity is now actively regressing amongst young men. Now, these ideas that are beginning to become more prevalent in culture, specifically around misogyny, are closely linked to this idea of disenfranchisement that is happening with young men. And according to experts, this disenfranchisement makes them particularly vulnerable to radicalization. And this is largely happening through a massive global digital ecosystem called the manosphere, which is made up of numerous subcultures like incels or red pill. And they don't have a unifying idea, but they do have some unifying beliefs. And those include that feminism is the cause of men's pain, and that there is a singular way to be a man in culture today. And because of the cultural silence that has existed around masculinity up until pretty recently, this has made it very easy for figures in the manosphere to package up a very singular idea about masculinity to young men. And for me, this is not an exploration, this is a reflection. Ben was an early entrant into red pill spaces, and while he eventually got out of the pipeline, for over a decade, it destroyed our relationship. Now, these ideas that are being perpetuated in some of these spaces that make it very alluring to young men like my brother are exploiting some of the anxieties that young men have in culture based off of these very antiquated standards that men have to live up to. And I think a very simple demonstration of what I mean by this is today, if you ask women, what does womanhood mean to you? Every single woman is going to give you a very different and a very valid answer, but I'm not sure that posing the same question to men about what masculinity means to them would yield such diverse responses. And these monolithic standards about masculinity are linked to making men more depressed, more violent, and more likely to take their own lives. So we have an enormous responsibility to break this cultural ultimatum that I believe we have constructed from offering either just a pipeline that is going to profit off of men's pain, or they can just settle for culture and media that is ignoring the crisis that they're going through altogether. Because lies will defeat silence every time, and that has brought us into this issue that we are facing in society today. Now, my panelists are going to talk about what it means to break this cultural ultimatum and what the future of advocacy for young men and boys needs to look like. I will leave you with one very final thought from me. There is no singular future of masculinity that one person can build, but what I can say is that after being a guy who was lured into manosphere spaces, Ben eventually returned to being the guy who wanted to have a dance party with his kid sister to the Spice Girls, and that feels like a pretty good guy to me. So now over to my incredible esteemed panelists. I'll do very quick introductions before we dive into the conversation. We have Christine Enba, who is a columnist and editor at The Washington Post, where she explores things like ideas, culture, and society. We have Richard Reeves from the American Institute for Boys and Men, who is quite the esteemed thinker in this space, having written a pretty well-regarded book on this topic of boys and men. We have Michelle Terry, who is the CEO of Movember, the leading men's health charity on a mission to step change men's mental health. And finally, but certainly not least, we have Joshua Hughes, who is a student at Howard University majoring in mathematics and is quite the impressive leader at his young age with his involvement in numerous NGOs. So first, I would love to start with you, Christine. You wrote one of the most widely read columns on Washington Post recently about masculinity and culture. I would love to hear from you some of your reflections that you have from that article and some of the observations that you've made about the singular standard of masculinity that is being perpetuated today.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'll just state that the title of that essay was Men Are Lost. Not to put too fine a point of it, but it was in many ways an illustration of exactly the story that you describe. I went out and spoke to a lot of young men in researching this quite long essay, and I heard over and over again a sense of confusion. One college student in particular stood out to me. I was asking him what masculinity meant to him, what he thought about being a man, and he said, "To be honest, I don't know what it means. And I feel like the men around me, they don't really know how to be." And this is happening for a lot of reasons, let's be clear. First of all, good ones. Society has shifted over the past half century. Women have broken down barriers and surged ahead. They're earning more, they're in the workplace, they're at colleges. In fact, if you look at college enrollment, now women achieve 100 bachelor's degrees, at least in the US, for every 74 that men do. And in the drop in college enrollment here, that's 70% men. It's led by men falling behind. But at the same time, as you pointed out, there isn't a real new model of what masculinity looks like. Now that men don't necessarily see themselves only fulfilling the roles of provider and protector, only seeing themselves succeeding, but yes, having to compete with their female classmates, there's a sense that they don't really know how to be. There are not good examples for what a modern masculinity looks like. At least that's what they think. And so they end up turning to the manosphere, to these manfluencers, as I call them. If you speak to any primary or secondary school teacher, for instance, you've, I'm sure, heard about Andrew Tate, who performs this vision of masculinity that's about buying expensive cars and literally abusing women. Unfortunately, though, because of the lack of other options, these influencers are having an effect. And we're seeing that statistically. So the global firm Ipsos conducted a survey this year on International Women's Day, which found that globally, more than half of citizens say that the push for gender equality has gone far enough in their country. And nearly half of them say that, in fact, efforts to help women achieve are now being used to discriminate against men. In essence, that women are pushing men back. And surprisingly, the numbers here in this survey are actually higher for younger men, for millennials and Gen Z, than they are even for older generations. Something is going wrong here. These numbers have also risen in just the past 5 years. One thing that I think we have to make clear is that women's success does not and should not come at the expense of men. The sexes have to and will rise and fall together. Women can succeed and men can succeed too. And a vision of masculinity that's based on degrading women, denouncing femininity, is not a masculinity that's the way forward.
Thank you so much, Christine. Richard, I would love to hear your perspective on this topic. I think some of the points that Christine raised are really critical for us to dive in further. And in your book of Boys and Men, you talk a lot about the disenfranchisement and the disillusionment that young men are facing. Can you expand on some of Christine's insights based off of your own analysis?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the invitation. I think I might be respectfully disruptive in the next few things I say. As a lifelong, ardent feminist, I have decided to create an institute focused on the problems of boys and men. That needs a bit of explanation. It's based on a few assumptions. It's based on assumption number one, and Christine has already referred to this, that in a number of countries in the world, and it's very important to be specific when we're talking about these issues, there are a number of gender gaps that now run in ways that go against the traditional narrative of gender equality. So in suicide, and I'm sure Michelle will talk about that, in education, in some other areas, wage stagnation, we're really seeing some problems, real problems for men, especially in the US, black boys and men, and those from working class backgrounds. So real problems. The second assumption is, and this really builds on both your points, Rachel, which is that, and Christine's points, that if there are real problems in a society faced by a group, and they don't see and hear those problems being addressed directly by mainstream institutions, they can turn into grievances. And grievances are weaponized by the manfluencers, to use Christine's term, or even people at the ballot box. And so I think we have a responsibility to take those problems seriously. And the final assumption is that we can, as we continue to do the necessary work for women and girls, also do the work that is increasingly clear we need to do for boys and men, that we can think two thoughts at once. We can do two things at once. And we have to make men, young men especially, feel like gender equality, gender equity, and feminism are also things that are for them. And that we're not only asking them to be good allies, which we should. We're not only asking them to examine their own prejudices, which we should, but we're also working for them. Because if young men feel like we're not working for them, we're not speaking for them, they'll go find someone who they think is. And as Christine's work shows, we may not like who that person is. If not us, who?
I think everything that you're saying, Richard, is spot on and respectively disruptive in the right direction. You know, Bell Hooks said in her book about masculinity and feminism that one of the challenges of feminism is that it's oftentimes not created the right forms or enough space for men to be involved in advocacy around gender equity. So I couldn't agree more with everything that you're saying. Joshua, we are so honored to have you here and hear your thoughts as a student and as a leader in your own right. I'd love to hear, based off of your lived experience, your expertise, some of your thoughts that Christine and Richard are posing here.
Yes, definitely. And I first want to start by saying thank you so much for the invitation to this amazing event. We need more events like this in order to really push these agendas forward. And in discussing the amazing research of Christine, the first thing that I think of when you think of gender equality is collaboration and community. As a future educator, I'm very aware that we as people, we learn from experiences, whether they be lived experiences or experiences that are shared from other people. And as a student that's attending the illustrious Howard University, the dynamic there is a little bit different because the women are actually the leaders of our campus. There's actually a 72% women enrollment compared to a 28% of males. So with women being the majority there, it's very important for us to learn from their perspectives, learn what they need, and be able to come together into these collaborative spaces to not only identify the problem and identify where our personal perspectives may differ, but to also identify where we can come together. And one quote that definitely lives with me is that we can move fast alone, but we can definitely move farther together.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Michelle, you are the CEO of Movember, which is such a leader in the space around men's health in general, but has a particular focus around men's mental health. And through the Unstereotype Alliance, I've been very lucky enough to be working with some of your colleagues on the role of the private sector in changing media's representation of men and their challenges around mental health. I'd love to hear your perspective based off of some of the research that y'all have done and the insights that you have about the state of men's mental health today, and in particular, maybe the role of media that is perpetuating some of these issues.
Yeah, thank you so much. And first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge, I feel so honored to be amongst you, all of you on the stage here, and Rupi, your beautiful, eloquent, emotional poem, which really just encapsulates the why and the feeling behind the work that we do. So thank you. So, Rachel, we know from OECD statistics in 2018 that men are 3 to 4 times more likely to die than women by suicide. And it might seem quite extreme that I start talking in a mental health discussion and immediately go to suicide, but I've been struck by something that Richard has previously pointed out recently, that the Centre for Disease Control here in the United States does not report on suicide being disproportionately a problem that is suffered by men. And, you know, to me that seems a little odd, given the statistics that we heard reported from the OECD. And at Movember, we believe that we have to think that this in a gendered way in order to think about what works to address the problem. So I think, you know, we should contemplate that. And we know that beyond suicide as well, men are overrepresented in risky behaviours that lead to harm, so tobacco, alcohol use, occupational risks, etc. And I think resonantly to some of the points that Christine was making, beyond these deaths of despair are economic and social changes over the last 40 years that have left men feeling lonely, feeling isolated, families lacking support, and women and communities really left to pick up the pieces, especially in those poor areas. And I think the other thing to think about is that for decades, mental health interventions have focused mostly on the individual to try and say, how can we give men the tools and support they need to cope with life's challenges as they get thrown at them across different points of life? But what's become clear is that placing the responsibility solely on the shoulders of men to create those structural and cultural changes, it simply won't work alone. We need to think in terms of how can we influence behaviours, systems and norms, and how they work together in intersection. So our vision is a world where men recognise when they need help, they know how and where to get help, and they get the support that really hits the mark. And thinking about systems and the ways that men interact, in Australia, we have an example. Only 1 in 5 people who seek talking therapy are men. Therapists are now disproportionately women. And of those men who do enter therapy, about 45% drop out prematurely. So we've developed a gender-responsive healthcare program in conjunction with our federal government called Men in Mind. And what that's intending to do, it's building an evidence base and training clinicians of how to engage confidently and with the right skills to connect with men when they're in distress so they get the best possible treatment. And we're starting to think, how can that be extended out to other interested groups, people like the police force who interact with men in distress. So there's also the community, and this is probably one of the most important and powerful ways that we can connect with men. So we've been investing for over 15 years in community intervention, and it's going where men are. It's thinking about the sports club, the gym, it's thinking about online, it's thinking about representation in the media and how men connect in the online space or the gaming space. So we've created a pretty robust evidence base. And what we're trying to do is design and then work with lots of other people to scale programs that can meet men where they are. And then possibly a little bit of a shameless plug for Movember, and we are the people who are responsible for some pretty questionable facial hair in the month formerly known as November, now Movember. But you know, there's change in the broader cultural environment that can be made. Our movement started 20 years ago in a pub in Melbourne, but since then we've enrolled millions of supporters around the world who've raised funds for men's health, but I think much more importantly have raised awareness of the importance of the health of men and boys in creating a healthier world, and started conversations. And we know that men who have awareness of this are more likely to seek help when they need it, twice as likely, and also twice as likely to spot signs in others and provide help as needed.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Christine, I want to dive actually into something that Michelle posed, which is that the conversation about masculinity and the struggles that men are facing has been posed as this individual failure of men, but as Michelle talked about, it's very systemic, it's cultural, it's embedded in society. I think knowing that we have a pretty firm grasp of the challenges today, from your perspective, what needs to happen next to address these root issues? What are these solutions that we need to give to young men and boys to model more positive demonstrations of masculinity while addressing some of these root causes that are having a halo effect with misogyny, with racism, with other forms of oppression?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I think we've already identified some really clear things just in this panel. I mean, first, what I've heard from, I think, every panelist is the idea of specificity. So we need to talk about men in the context of masculinity, in the context of their systems and communities, not just talk about women and say, well, men should support them. That's what men should do. We have to be able to speak directly to men. And we also need to speak positively in some ways, in many ways, I would say. We've had a lot of discussion over the past several years in our discourse about toxic masculinity, the things that men have done wrong, how men are holding women back. But that's a very negative vision. And negative visions tend not to be the ones that inspire. If we want men to do better, to be better allies, we have to provide a positive vision for what men can be that's also specific to the lived reality of being a man. That means not just saying, well, be more like your sister, or, well, just support women in your community, but nothing to the men themselves. What does a good man look like, and can we talk about that? And when we do talk about that, we need to be open to a broader vision of masculinity. So when I wrote my essay, I did a follow-up piece asking readers to just write in and tell me who their ideal of masculinity was, who an ideal man could be. And the responses were fantastic. I mean, it was everyone from Mr. Rogers to LeBron James to Aristotle to Captain Kirk. You don't have to be the Lone Ranger. You don't have to be a professional soccer player. You definitely don't have to be a misogynist like Andrew Tate. There are many, many visions of what a good man can be. We can present those and celebrate them, and that's far more attractive than just casting blame.
Very well said. So, Richard, I think building on what Christine is saying, I think I know the answer to this, but do we need to advocate for men? And if so, what does that look like?
I do think we need to advocate for boys and men when the data suggests that there are areas where they're struggling, and the evidence is quite strong, without in any way giving up the advocacy that remains necessary for women and girls. But this issue of how to be as well as how not to be, right? This story of like, we don't want you to be like this, we don't want you to do that, but then what do we want you to do? This positive vision. I think that that's best answered with real people in real life rather than online. As a general proposition, boys and young men, in fact, everybody believes their eyes before they believe their ears. And so one of the many things I love about Joshua is that he's going to be an educator, right? That makes him a minority in the US, for sure, because we have seen the share of teachers in the US who are male drop from 33% when Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980 to 23% today and falling. We have halved the share of men in social work and psychology. Among psychologists under the age of 30 in the US, only 5% are male. And so all of the work we're doing to promote women into traditionally male professions and occupations is absolutely necessary. Where is the equivalent work to at least arrest the decline in the share of men in our classrooms, in psychotherapy, in the mental health profession? And I don't see it at all. So there's an advocacy point for you, which, by the way, I think is a deeply feminist claim. But I don't hear almost anybody talking about it, because the Andrew Tates of this world and the misogynist right, they don't care about that stuff. But too often, it feels like more progressively inclined organizations are also not taking up those issues. That creates a vacuum, and the internet abhors a vacuum. Someone's filling it. Back to what I said earlier, we need to be filling that vacuum rather than leaving it vacant for the manosphere.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I'd like to close with a quick rapid fire to each of our panelists, being very mindful of time, so maybe just in a couple of sentences, starting first with you, Joshua, and then going down the line. What is one message that you want young men who are watching today to take away from today's discussion on how they can respectfully disrupt the conversation about masculinity and better build more positive models for each other and better support each other in the future?
Thank you. That's an amazing question. The initial word that comes to mind is a word that Richard shared earlier, which is interpretation. Very similarly to the poetry shared by Ms. Rupi Kaur or the poetry shared by our panelists earlier, I believe that life is full of a collection of metaphors, and we really have to look at these abstractly in order to really understand different perspectives. And so being able to understand the perspective of a woman, being able to understand the perspective of a man, being able to share these perspectives is really the first step in being able to make any disruptive, respectful change.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Michelle?
I hope if there's one thing that you take away from this discussion is that, I think all of us are feminists. All of us want a better world. But it's the importance of recognizing and thinking and investing in men's health. Because we know that healthier men lead to healthier societies and ultimately a better world. And ultimately a world that's going to support equality for women. So with happier and healthier men, families go stronger, relationships are better, communities prosper, and we are all better off.
Thank you, Michelle. Richard?
It's not a zero-sum game. We have to do both things at once. And if people don't feel like the women's movement is a movement for humanity and for boys and men and for us all, to echo Christine, unless men feel like we're rising together, then we're going to lose more and more of them. And I really feel like an initiative like this is at a pivot point, and that we've got to move into that space confidently and positively to make sure that our young men feel included in this conversation.
Well said. Christine?
I mean, I would almost echo that final point. We have to remember that this isn't a zero-sum game, that the sexes do rise and fall together. We want to support women, but women also have men and boys in their lives, their fathers, their husbands, their friends, their partners, who they love and they want to succeed. And we can't succeed without each other.
Very well said. Thank you, Christine. So I will close just by saying I hope all of you are as energized as I am by this discussion. We have so much work to do when it comes to young men and boys, and as our panelists said, this is not a zero-sum game. We need to be working together in service of gender equity for all. So thank you so much, HeForShe, and thank you so much to my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much to our panelists. I could not help when you were talking about the narrative of boys and men and how to disrupt that, Rachel, and what a great conversation, is that what are our entry points into this conversation? And I couldn't help but what was my entry point? And as a reporter and anchor at CNN Worldwide, I was having to report on human trafficking. And repeatedly, I would see women and girls always put in the position of yes, being the trafficking victim. And that was when I became, well, a feminist. I'm 9 years old. I'm about this tall. But 9 years ago is when I realized that. and that narrative of disruption for boys and men, it all starts with us somewhere. And how do we support us to do better? I'm 9 years old. I need a lot of help, and I am learning along the way. And I think all of us, through that great conversation, are finding those entry points and finding those support groups. What a great conversation. Thank you again for our last panel. So that was our 3 panels. And although I have been said I can do a lot of things, I can't play this. So don't worry. But who you will have up here is somebody very, very accomplished, and I cannot wait. I would like to welcome composer, pianist, activist, Sony Masterworks recording artist, Chloe Flower. Chloe, it is so great to see you, and we were talking about a topic you know very, very well. You serve on the advisory board of the UNODC's Artists United Against Human Trafficking. Thank you for that. She is also the youngest board member of the Liberace Foundation and is fighting to make music education accessible to every student. Chloe, it's all yours. Chloe, thank you so much. The first thing that came to mind was, just one? She was fantastic. Chloe, thank you again for that fantastic rendition. All good things come to an end, but not being respectfully disruptive. We finished this great afternoon with all of you at the HeForShe Summit. Cannot thank all of you for leaning in this conversation. Thank you to all of our great panelists and speakers throughout this morning and now afternoon. We cannot thank you for the ideas you gave us, the energy, the big ideas, as well as the incremental steps we need to do together. I cannot thank you enough. And thank you to the Executive Director, Seema Bahus, and the entire HeForShe team. Big round of applause to them, by the way. Thank you for staying strong for 9 years. Will all of you be back for year 10? Yes, we will all be back together. Thank you to the HeForShe team. It has been an honor to be here with all of you to make this, we hope, understanding and great lessons going forward. And if we don't do it now, if not now, when, right? Thank you and have a great rest of your 78th Anga.